How do you make things happen? How do you change your organization? How do you make sure that the whole team are running with you? How do you engage the people you work with so that they feel like getting out of bed in the morning and really making a difference? And I've been on a personal journey, and I just want to explain a little bit of it to you. You see, I started off not talking to corporations about global trends. I started off as a physician. In fact, as a terminal care hospice physician in London, looking after men and women who are dying at home and their families. And that was my job. And I did that for a number of years. And in fact, through that, I landed up getting involved with HIV and AIDS. And so I've worked in the National Health Service. I've worked in the hospice movement, which is selling services to the National Health Service. I have looked to clone the lessons that we learned from the hospice movement and bring them into the National Health Service. So the team I worked with at UCH was modeled on a hospice. And also then found that there were defective things within the NHS and having to start an AIDS NGO. And the reason I did was because I found that people who were dying of AIDS were dying terribly in London, in teaching hospitals. Even my own cancer team would not get involved. That was a failure of my own leadership, by the way. I went onto an AIDS ward. I saw young men suffocating to death in a side room. One young man in particular, he had tubes out of every orifice. He was... His knuckles were white with fear. He was within hours of death. And there was no nurse with him, no social worker. His family were not there. I said, where is his family? They said, you can't call them because they don't know he has this problem, and he doesn't want them to know. I said, so you're going to call them at 3 o'clock in the morning and tell them to collect their son in a body bag? And he was getting all the wrong medicine. It was like 35 years of hospice medicine had stood still. And I don't like confrontation. I had a big barnstorm on the ward about what was happening. I came off the ward shaking. I was a relatively junior doctor on my first visit to an AIDS ward and having to fundamentally challenge what was going on. But you know what even more shook me was when I went back to my own colleagues and they said, ha, you're on your own, mate. I hope you haven't got any new referrals. I said, I'm sorry? Well, we're a cancer team. We're not going to be involved with AIDS. And then I found that the Meals on Wheels service would not go in, or if they did, they rang the doorbell and then they ran away, because they were afraid that HIV would hop through the air and they would get infected, and so on. And that's how AIDS Asset started, an AIDS organization which my wife and I have been involved in now since 1987 and is now active in many, many, many countries, in places like Uganda, Russia, Thailand, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, and the rest. So that's part of my story. It was a failure of my own leadership. We had to clone an AIDS team within the National Health Service. It took 10 years to mold these two teams together. Why? Because the cancer team couldn't see it as part of their mission at all. It was a failure of my leadership. I failed to engage my own team in a process of change. So we had to go around them and invent something new, and then we had to invent an NGO totally outside of the National Health Service. And the rest is history, because it became a movement. So that's been part of my journey. And it was through writing books about AIDS and seeing things happen and writing other things that companies started to ask me. Having had the experience of running an NGO, commenting on a very wide range of issues and trends, started to ask me to give advice on how they should run their businesses. And I began to learn something, which is that you can stay in an organization like the National Health Service, or you can decide to manage a team and create a movement. Sometimes you can be more effective. I know for many of you this is a dilemma, to stay closer to clients or to manage. But often you can have greater impact by managing. Through your leadership, you can raise up a whole generation of others that will go on and do what you have been doing in the past inspiring them with the same vision and passion to make a difference than if you stayed where you were. And in fact, people said, well, why did you come out of looking after people who are dying? I said, well, there have been whole generations of people who've gone into hospice work, into social work, into nursing, into medicine, into just care services within social services, as social workers, because of the work of Asset. And then they said, well, why are you not doing Asset full-time now? And I said, well, because I've had opportunities to influence companies, and I've learned that actually you can touch one company, one big company, like Barclays Bank in South Africa, and suddenly you find 25,000 worlds change. And I'm still involved with the AIDS charity about 30–35% of my time.